Hello everyone. Thank you for attending today's Watershed webinar, Pennsylvania Freshwater Fish Species. Our presenter is Mr. Jacob Maddigan, a recent graduate from the Biology Department at St. Francis University.
Thank you guys for coming today. I'm pretty excited to do this. I've never done a webinar before, so please bear with me a little bit while I figure this out, but hopefully it will go smoothly. So just real quick, today we're going to be talking about firstly who I am, so that you guys know that I'm not just somebody off the street that they found. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how the Fish and Boat Commission categorizes fish in the state. We're going to talk a little bit about the taxonomy of the fish themselves. We're going to discuss some of the common sport species in Pennsylvania, talk about the environmental threats to these aquatic ecosystems, and some of the ways that people can get involved and do their part. So firstly, uh, I am Jacob Maddigan. I graduated St. Francis with a degree in biology in December. During my time at St. Francis, I had the opportunity to do some research between my junior and senior year, and I really wanted to do something about fish because that's what I'm interested in. My advisor, Dr. Loya, uh, is an entomologist, so he was interested in insects. And during that summer, we were expecting the emergence of the brood 10 cicadas. So I did my research on how stream fish change their diets whenever new prey is introduced into the ecosystem. This prey specifically was those cicadas. And then I was further granted an opportunity to go to uh, the Joint Aquatic Sciences meeting and present my findings there as a representative for the American Fisheries Society. And then this past summer, I interned at Wildwood Park, which is a kind of an urban nature preserve in Harrisburg. And I worked a lot with their day camps and a little bit with some of the adult programs. But that's what that picture to the side there is. That is me teaching one of the youth groups about some of the freshwater macroinvertebrates in a stream nearby. And also last summer, I was one of the head volunteers at Capital Area Sportsmen's for Youth, which is at a local sportsman's club in Harrisburg, and I ran the fishing station there. So we had somewhere around 150 participants throughout the day, and just kids coming by, and they rotate through the stations. And at my station, we gave them a fishing rod and a worm, and actually managed to get 100% fish catch rates. So I like to spend a lot of my time outside and helping out where I can, but recreationally, I started fishing a lot whenever we would go camping as a family or in my time in Boy Scouts, and then eventually decided to take on fly fishing merit badge, which was very frustrating at first, but eventually has become a really, really significant passion of mine. And then really got into it during COVID. Whenever the entire world was shut down, I was still able to go out and catch fish because the fish had no idea that COVID existed. But more recently, I learned how to scuba dive, just as another way to experience that underwater world. And then most recently, my girlfriend is from Florida, so whenever she and I go down to visit her family, we decided we want to do something pretty cool, and so we decided to get into free diving and spearfishing. For those that don't know, free diving is essentially snorkeling, but you're trying to achieve depth during that. So it's not all just hanging out on the surface. A lot of it's diving fairly deep. We're new to the sport, so we're not going all that deep, maybe only 20 feet at the most right now. But along with that is spearfishing. We both like to fish, so we figured, hey, while we're out free diving, snorkeling, why don't we bring something along that maybe we can bring back dinner. This is not a picture of me. It is one I found on the internet, but it's a pretty good example of what spearfishing is. That this guy has speared is a lionfish, which are really invasive and really destroying reefs in the Atlantic Ocean. So whenever we go out, we look for lionfish a lot, but haven't found any yet. So now into the kind of meat and potatoes of our presentation. This is a chart of all the game fish in Pennsylvania. And by game fish, I mean those fish that have a state record associated with them, if that's weight or if it's length. Either way, they have a record making them a game fish. So people pursue these to catch and sometimes eat, but a lot of the time it's just for the thrill of catching the fish and then releasing it back. Breaking this down, 11 of the 31 listed are not native to Pennsylvania, which is a staggering 35.5% of the fish that people try to catch in Pennsylvania aren't even from here. 2 of those aren't even from this continent. So there are a lot of fish in Pennsylvania that people catch, but a pretty significant portion of those aren't from Pennsylvania, and some of them aren't even from North America at all. For our very first question of the evening, making sure you guys are still paying attention, I'd like to know if you guys know what the Pennsylvania state fish is. Yeah, there it is. Select your answer, and then talk about it in a second.
Can you see the results?
I can. So 29% of people said it's the brown trout, 71 said it's the brook trout. So the majority got brown trout, or I'm sorry, got brook trout, which is correct. Congratulations. There it is, brook trout. So kind of unofficially, but also a little bit officially, these sport species can be broken into 2 non-genetic categories. These are just based on the type of areas that they live. So you have warm water species like bass, panfish, and catfish. Warm water environments typically are larger bodies of water. They're slower moving. The example is this bottom picture. This is a picture that I took while I was out kayaking and doing some fishing in Harrisburg, which is where I'm from. So that's the city of Harrisburg in the left of the picture. But it's it's a really wide, really fairly shallow, but really wide, really slow moving, really warm water. Whereas cold water species such as trout, salmon, and grayling are often found in faster moving water that's colder, hence cold water. And an example would be this one to the right, which is a picture that a friend of mine took of me fly fishing in Spring Creek near Bellefonte outside of State College. So more on the official side, they do have definitions, with warm water being the maintenance and propagation of the fish species and additional flora and fauna which are indigenous to warm water habitats. They like to use the word in the definition, which doesn't really help us that much, but whenever we compare that to the cold water definition, which is essentially the same with the addition of fish species including family Salmonidae, which are your salmon and trout. That's really the important thing here, is that warm water fisheries are capable of sustaining trout, whereas warm water fisheries are unable to support trout, whereas cold water fisheries are able to support trout. And that's mostly what we're going to be focusing in on today, are the trout. So I'm sure a lot of you know that in Pennsylvania, it is almost a religion that on 8 a.m. on the first Saturday in April, everybody that they know show up and line the banks of every stream in the state trying to catch their limited trout. A lot of times these trout are stocked, so they're not the native ones that are swimming around and reproducing, but we do have those rivers as well. Especially in areas of the state such as the greater St. Francis area that have a whole lot of cold water mountain streams. That's where you're going to find trout. So that's where this opening day of trout season is especially a big deal. I know that during my time in Scouts, we would always do a weekend camping trip where we would head up into the mountains and stay in a cabin. And essentially for 2 or 3 days, we would just go down and catch fish all day and get a whole bunch of scouts to catch their first fish. Lots of people are taking merit badges, fishing and fly fishing merit badge, and then teach a bunch of kids how to cook too. So it's a really good time. It's a really good time to get out and spend time with family and friends and all that stuff. But it's not always a good thing. So whenever we get a little bit further after we talk about some of the species, we'll talk about some of the impacts that are going on with this stocking schedule and people being around and that sort of thing. So real quick, this red blob here is where the family of Salmonidae branches. This section up here are all the salmon, including rainbow trout. These are the more or less true trout, which are we'll be talking about the brown trout, and then the chars being brook trout. So the three we're talking about today are brook trout, brown trout, and rainbow trout. First is my favorite, which is brook trout, our Pennsylvania state fish. They are actually a char, like I mentioned just a second ago, and are closely related to the Arctic char and lake trout. They are my favorite because they are just absolutely gorgeous. This little guy got torn up a little bit. He's missing part of a gill plate and part of his tail, but you know, that happens. So they're absolutely gorgeous. They take a fly really well. The thing sticking out of its mouth is a fly. It's called an elk hair caddis. It's meant to imitate a caddis fly. And to the right is a map showing its native range. So all the way through the Appalachian Mountains for the most part, and through the Great Lakes into some of the Midwest are where you can find brook trout. There are even some varieties of brook trout subspecies that are diadromous. So that means that they can go between two different kinds of water, this water being freshwater and saltwater. That's what the yellow here in New England is, down through here. And those are known locally as salters. Those guys get really, really big. This fish that's pictured here is pretty big for the stream that it was caught out of. That stream is like, you know, you can almost jump across it. Whereas some of the salters and even up into northern New England, you can catch some 20+ inch brook trout where you've got a whole lot of cold water all the time. So these brook trout are native to Pennsylvania, like we mentioned earlier, but in some areas they're stocked. So generally speaking, if you're in an area that has both stocked and native fish, you can tell the difference, one based on color, where the wild trout will typically be much more vibrant in their colors. In this one, you can kind of see little blue rings around some red dots and stuff like that. Oftentimes, those kinds of coloration are not present in the stocked fish. Stocked fish are generally a little bit more torn up. This guy's pretty torn up too. But also the stocked fish will really give you a ride whenever you hook into one. I'm sorry, the wild ones will give you a ride. The stock fish are pretty mellow. They just kind of feel like dead weight on the end of the line. Rainbow trout are also native to the United States and the greater of North America. However, they are native to the western drainages of the Rocky Mountains. They are in the same genus as all the Pacific salmon, and salmon are famous for spending the majority of their life in saltwater and then moving into freshwater to spawn. And these rainbow trout will do the same thing. However, generally speaking, with common names, rainbow trout is the term used to refer to the fish that spend their entire lives in freshwater, whereas steelhead is the term used for the trout that are spending the majority of their life in saltwater, moving into freshwater to spawn, even though they're the exact same species. So these fish are native to the opposite side of the continent, but at some point along the way, somebody decided, hey, let's move these to other parts of the country so that other people can catch them too. So now they're stocked throughout the majority of North America, and you can catch them all over the place. And there are quote unquote steelhead in Lake Erie. So in the winter and in fall, people will migrate up to the creeks feeding into Lake Erie in their attempt to catch steelhead, or at least Pennsylvania's version of steelhead. And then moving further away from the United States are brown trout. Brown trout are native to Europe. They are not native to North America in the slightest. As of now, they have been stocked into pretty much every body of water capable of holding them, to the point where a lot of them are reproducing on their own. By the definition of invasive, they are invasive. They are non-natives causing damage to the environment. However, because they are adored so much by lots of fishermen, they are managed the same as the native brook trout, which I don't particularly agree with, but that's just kind of the way it is right now. Even though they're not native, they are fun to catch. In the 1800s, they were introduced, so they've been here a long time, and since then, a lot of brown trout have found ways to kind of reach into the environment, grab a hold, and stay there. So we have a lot of wild populations of brown trout, not only in Pennsylvania, but all over the country. And they're probably the most commonly caught trout in the United States, regardless that they're not from here. And I think a lot of the reason for their great success in this country is that they can live in slightly warmer waters than brook trout can. And they're stocked all over the place, including Puerto Rico, as we can see from this map, which seems like not really a place for trout, more coral fish and really oddly colored stuff. But apparently brown trout can kind of be wherever they want as long as they get the right food. So, second question, which of these fish cannot be found in Pennsylvania? I already mentioned a couple of them, so. All right. There's a little bit more variation in answer there. 88% saying cutthroat trout and 13 saying golden rainbow trout. So cutthroat trout is correct. There are no cutthroat trout in Pennsylvania. To my knowledge, there aren't any cutthroat trout on the East Coast at all. These are native to the same areas as rainbow trout. Golden rainbow trout are the same species as steelhead and rainbow trout. They're just genetically, they are bred for that golden color, and they are stocked throughout the state. I don't know of any wild holdings of golden rainbow trout, because if you've ever been walking a stream bank and seen one, they're pretty easy to spot, which means that predators can see them pretty easily too. So they wouldn't last very long. Lake trout can be found in Lake Erie, and big deep lakes such as Lake Racetown has lake trout. So moving on to some of the difficult things that are happening for brook trout. First and foremost, kind of the thing that most animals struggle with in general is poor land use practices, specifically agriculture and urbanization. Agriculture might not seem too bad because it's, out in rural areas and away from a whole bunch of people, but farmers put things on the fields. They put herbicides and pesticides on their crop, and then as it rains, that water's got to go somewhere, and that water has picked up those herbicides and pesticides, and now it's flowing directly into the water. And if it's not disrupting the water chemistry enough to kill the fish, it might be hurting the eggs, so recruitment will be down, or it could be hurting the prey that the fish are feeding on. Fish feed on a lot of insects, and that's exactly what pesticides are trying to kill. Urbanization, which is shown in this picture, can be pretty detrimental to aquatic ecosystems. There's a lot of pavement, and with pavement comes the inability for water to get down into the soil and filter. So you have a lot of runoff that comes directly into the waterways and ends up polluting. So there's a whole bunch of gross stuff all around in the city, and then all that stuff gets picked up by the water and carried directly into the waterways, just like with agriculture. Secondly is fragmentation, which is pictured a little bit here. You can see kind of a dam underneath this bridge. Dams aren't used so much in Pennsylvania for hydroelectric power like they may be out west, but we do have plenty of dams to create reservoirs for drinking water or for boating recreation or stuff like that. And whenever you slow down the water and you keep it from constantly moving and aerating, you're also going to make it warmer. So with less oxygen in the water and with warmer water, brook trout are not going to be able to survive. So really the best ways to counteract that are just to, keep your pollution to a minimum. If you can keep stuff like shopping carts and tires out of the waterways, that's probably a good thing. And if you can enjoy recreating in areas and getting your water from sources outside of reservoirs, then maybe we can keep some of our water a lot more fast flowing and capable for the sustainment of brook trout. Next is sedimentation. So whenever we build roads into areas or even trails, sometimes we have to build ways for water to get through. So that means that as water is moving from upstream where it's clean and there are no roads to downstream, those roads are going to have the same runoff effects as if you're in the city. This might just be through a state forest or whatever, but with a gravel road or a dirt road or whatever kind of road, you're still going to have stuff coming off of it from the vehicles that are coming by, or even whatever the road is made out of. If it's just gravel, there's a lot of dust and debris in that gravel road that as it rains, that's going to wash away and get into the waterway. And then as things are cut down, such as deforestation and stuff like that, you're going to have water temperature start to increase. So as we're cutting down the trees lining the banks of the stream, these trees lining the banks are called the riparian zone. Once we start reducing our riparian zone, the trees aren't going to be able to absorb bad things with their roots and keep it out of the water. And we're going to start having a lot more erosion of the bank because the tree roots aren't there to kind of hold it all in place. And then these last two, the presence of non-native species, so specifically competition with brook trout. I know the stream that runs by the cabin that I have, there used to be 100% brook trout in that stream. The Fish and Boat Commission started stocking brown trout. Some of those brown trout didn't get caught during trout season, so they stayed there and they started reproducing. And now there's probably a 50-50 distribution of brown trout to brook trout in what was 5 years ago 100% brook trout. So brown trout, they're a little bit tougher in some circumstances. They get bigger. They can handle warmer water. They can handle higher pollution levels to an extent. And with them being bigger and a little bit more resilient to these environmental changes, they can really just outcompete the brook trout. And if we're not careful, there could be no brook trout in that stream anymore. And then lastly, something that kind of hits home for the mid-state is acid mine drainage. Acid mine drainage is essentially that same concept as the runoff from urbanization, but it's coming from a mine. And specifically, it's bringing metals into the waterways, which are suffocating the fish and the prey species in the waterways, and then turning it really kind of disgusting colors. So this one is like an orangish red, which indicates the presence of iron, and it really just destroys everything. This is a picture from an article out near Pittsburgh, and you can even see, even though they're one side's taken in winter and one side's taken in summer, even the vegetation on the side looks healthier, and that's not even in the water. So just imagine how the ecosystem of benthic invertebrates and the fish and all that sort of stuff is able to bounce back. And then as the water bounces back, those things will bounce back, the vegetation will bounce back, mammals and birds will be able to prey on the stuff that's in the water, and the entire ecosystem is having a better time. And then some opportunities for people to get involved if this has meant enough to you that you want to make some changes. Scouts BSA is Boy Scouts previously, so now boys and girls can join. Girl Scouts, Trout Unlimited, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, those all have different volunteer opportunities. If you've got kids, I highly recommend Scouts. I was in Scouts from 5th grade through my senior year of high school. It was a great time. We got to go outside and do all kinds of fun stuff. It really grows an appreciation for this kind of thing. If you just join Trout Unlimited, you're sending your money off to a non-governmental organization who's putting their efforts forward to protecting our resource of trout. And they're doing a whole lot of buying land and restoring for the betterment of the fish. All of these have volunteer opportunities for you to go out and do stream work, or if that's not really your type of thing, you can just send them money and they will put your donations to good use. Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, though, all you have to do to help them out and do their conservation work is buy a fishing license. I don't think a lot of people realize that 100% of fishing license sales go towards the betterment and conservation of our waterways. So one, it's illegal to fish without a license. So if you want to go fishing, you have to get a license. But also know that that isn't just going into some politician's pocket or anything like that. You're actually helping what it is you're trying to enjoy. So how will you help out? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to get a fishing license? Are you just going to try to recycle more and reduce your consumption, and just try to reduce your carbon footprint? I hope you guys were able to learn something here. I really appreciate you guys all signing up for this. And I hope this has inspired you to, one, go outside, and to appreciate something that you might not see all the time. It's pretty easy just to take a hike and cross over the bridge over the creek and not really understand what's going on under there. But that's the thing that I really care about in the biology field, and I hope I have helped to uh, develop your caring for that too. So thanks. Any questions?
Awesome. So thank you so much for doing this, for being your first presentation. I think it went pretty smoothly. You pulled it off like a pro.
Thank you.
So while we're waiting to see if anybody's got any questions, I'll ask you a little bit about the research you did. What did you find with the cicadas? Was there anything interesting from that?
Yeah, so we were looking to see just kind of how things changed. And it was pretty interesting. Unfortunately, the area that I'm in here, we didn't get as much of an emergence as a lot of the rest of the state. But I did find that whenever there was the addition of the cicadas to the food chain, that fish did eat them, but they didn't like completely change what they were eating before that. So there was still a pretty good variety of stuff in their stomachs um, with the addition of cicadas this time.
Did that involve actually catching them and opening up their stomachs, or did you like pump their stomachs out, or how did that work?
Yeah, I recruited a few other biology major friends, and we did about 40 dissections, which was pretty much just my friend cutting open fish, and then me looking at the contents under a dissection microscope and more or less identifying what was in there. And there's a pretty good variety of stuff from like fishing hooks and rocks up to legs and wings of insects and kind of cool stuff like that.
Fascinating. Very neat. So Dr. Loya, whenever he recommended you for doing this presentation, had mentioned that you have some future career aspirations in kind of this field, like you'd like to work in fisheries maybe? Is that the case?
Yes. Hopefully I'll be able to start in the fall and get a Master of Science in the whole fisheries ecology kind of thing, and then be able to work and do research and kind of involve myself a little bit more in the greater conservation field.
Awesome. Does anybody out there have any questions? You can type them in the chat or come off of mute.
Yeah, Michael, I have a question. Did you, well, right now, what I'm trying to do is increase, I belong to an organization, and we have conservation committees in both. And we're looking at trying to get people to be more aware of the types of things they purchase, because I know in some of the discussions we've had, some people don't bother to read labels with what they buy from the grocery store. I'm talking more in terms of household hazardous waste. And some of them have even indicated that they pour things down the drain, which would greatly impact water quality. But that has household hazardous waste, and also the possibility of some of the problems with stormwater runoff. I know where I live in Blair County, we have a lot of housing developments kind of up on the higher levels around town. And since a lot of that open space has been paved over, the borough itself is having a bit more of a problem with the impact of stormwater runoff. And that's, again, has created a problem with the sewer system, sewer and water here in the borough itself. So have you looked at any of those types of impacts? Are you more looking at the general impact of human environmental interaction with your research?
So are you referring to the The research that I did, or just interest in general?
Just in general, will those be some of the things you'll look at in your grad school program in fisheries management?
Oh yeah, definitely. So with ecology, it really requires kind of a handyman kind of specialty. So you have to know a little bit about a whole lot of stuff, and then generally you'll focus in on certain areas. Um, Specifically, I'm interested more in game management. So the the kind of species we were talking about today, but also predation. So what's eating what, and how does that affect the greater scheme of things? Um, but with that being said, on the game management side of things, you're not going to have certain species in areas for people to catch if you're developing those areas and you've got these kind of water problems that you're talking about. Um, so I think there will definitely be future classes about that in grad school and that sort of thing. Um, that's a little bit more into the field that my dad works in. My dad works for DEP, um, and does a lot with uh, groundwater contamination more than surface water contamination. Um, but yeah, I mean, all that stuff that you mentioned will absolutely destroy an ecosystem if it's not put into check. Question in the chat: how do the stock trout affect the wild trout? Do they compete for food or overtake breeding ground? Are stock trout usually fished out of stream first? It's a fantastic question. There's a whole lot of research being done into the stock trout competition with wild trout right now. Um, Generally speaking, a lot of these stocked trout aren't very good at being wild fish, so they don't recognize prey sources as well as a wild fish might. And generally, not to anthropomorphize them too much, but generally they're a lot more stupid than the native fish are. So those are the ones that are pretty easy to catch. They're the bigger ones, so people can see them better whenever they're fishing. Uh, so whenever people go in uh, for trout season and they're picking off fish, generally speaking, they're going to be the stocked fish. Also, because there are areas uh, of state waters that are not permitted for the taking of fish. So there are areas that are catch and release only. There are areas that are fly fishing, catch and release only, stuff like that. And often those areas are the ones that are much better at holding the native fish than the stocked fish. Um, Also, because whenever they stock fish, there's a picture of it earlier, but they just kind of dump an entire bucket into one area at a time. And a lot of times, if you can find that area as a fisherman, you'll catch a whole lot of fish really quickly because they won't go anywhere. You know, if you come a week and a half after they just stocked and you find that hole that they dumped a whole bunch of fish into, there's probably going to be the majority of those fish still in there. So the uh, the stocked fish generally, if they can hang out long enough to get into the breeding cycles of the native fish, where you start to see issues is uh, if the fish are able to hybridize. So, say a brook trout lays eggs and the brown trout comes and fertilizes the eggs, and uh, it actually takes, then you can run into some issues with things like some genetic issues essentially coming into the native populations. But also, if you have fish that are much bigger, you know, if they're stocking 14 to 18-inch fish, but the native brook trouts in there, the full size adult ones are only in the 6 to 8-inch range. Those bigger fish, if there's something that they're competing for food or whatever, a lot of times those bigger fish are just going to bully the smaller ones out of the way. Now the smaller ones don't have enough food, so now they don't have enough energy to reproduce. And if they get caught and they're released, they might not survive and that sort of stuff. So usually there can be a lot of really poor impacts, but the state does recognize some areas as wild trout water, and those are not stocked at all. So there's a little bit of separation between the two. I would like to see the state go into something a little bit more conservative than that. I think it's Wyoming has a program where if there are wild fish at all in a stream, it will not be stocked, and it's not, it's catch and release only. So again, that was a lot of words from me, but if the essentially if there are stocked fish in the same area as the native fish, a lot of times those stocked fish will outcompete the wild fish because they're put in there as adults rather than as juveniles in cases.
So I know we've got is it the Asian carp that's potentially coming into some of the rivers and making its way up? I guess it's pretty much made its way up the Mississippi to the Great Lakes almost. Like, is that a concern for Pennsylvania, or are there any other fish that are of notable concern at this point?
What you mentioned about the Asian carp in the Mississippi is absolutely correct. In Pennsylvania, the Asian carp isn't of a concern yet, as far as I know, but at least in the Harrisburg area, there are concerns about snakeheads, which were introduced into the Chesapeake Bay region and have since moved upstream into areas. They're, I think, from Asia, and they're just ferocious predators. You know, they eat anything and everything. And the other is flathead catfish, which seem like they should be here, but they're native to the Mississippi drainage, not the Atlantic drainage by way of the Chesapeake. So people probably have stocked them in an area. They have reproduced and gotten their way out, and they're moving up the Susquehanna and out competing a lot of our native fish. You know, they're out competing a lot of the smallmouth. They're out competing a lot of the channel catfish, a lot of the burbot, a lot of the eels, things that we want to have around. Those are really doing damage on, and unfortunately the Fish and Boat Commission doesn't completely recognize that they're an issue because they are considered a game fish. So those fish are kind of facilitating license sales. People are buying a fishing license to go catch a flathead catfish, but they are invasive.
All right, does anybody have any other questions? Jake, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I got one final question for you if nobody else has anything. Maybe a two-part question depending on how you answer it. So where's your favorite place to fish? If it's outside of Pennsylvania, tell us a place inside Pennsylvania and one outside, or if it's Pennsylvania, just where would that be?
In Pennsylvania, probably Rattling Creek, which is a trout stream. It's in northern Dauphin County. I have a cabin in the state forest there. So one of the reasons why it's my favorite is because there's a lot of that stream covers a lot of vertical feet fairly quickly. So it has a lot of really huge boulders and lots of deep pools and a lot of real fast rapids. So lots of variety in ecosystem in the same, couple 100 yards, which is cool for the fish, but it also makes fishing kind of difficult. Lots of little hidey holes for the fish to hang out in.
Alrighty, well, thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today, and everybody for joining us. Have a great day.